welcome to day 18 of the CRaFTi Advent series. Today's card is kind of doing something similar to day 1, where I did the Nuvo Embellished Cascading butterflies, but for this card I've done it with hearts, and I've used some of the newer Nuvo products that have come out, like the expanding mousse and the vintage Nuvo drops as well. I think I was saying on an earlier day, the one that I'd done the Pebeo Fantasy paints on, I can't remember which day it was now, about that butterfly die being really great for that kind of technique because it has the outside edge already built into it, so it makes the wells really easily. And I think I referred to this card in that video, but anyway. So for this card, I'm using separate heart dies to create the apertures. So you'll see a little bit later on how I then have to create separate little wells for each of the hearts, and at the end you sort of cut them down to size and stick them all behind each of the heart apertures that you've done on your main panel. Most of the hearts I've used here are the ones from the Cascading Heart Waterfall die set from Tonic. They're wonderful waterfalls. And that little small heart is from a really old die set of theirs that had like a zip and some little buttons, but it was just the smallest heart that I had. And then obviously the sentiment is one of their gorgeous sentiment strip dies, the With Love one, and I'm using, what's the colour of that card? Rose Platinum mirror card to cut the sentiment out, and then I've cut the backing bubble from vellum. And you see me now, I'm cutting out lots of those same heart shapes, but I'm just doing it randomly on a piece of card, and then in a minute you'll see me cut them all apart and then stick those apertures to other pieces of card, and this is going to create the little wells to fill with the products. And as I said at the beginning, we're using the Nuvo Expanding Mousse and the Nuvo Vintage Drops. But if you go back and watch day 1, you'll see me using Nuvo Gilding Flakes, Nuvo Pure Sheen Glitter, and just the normal Nuvo Crystal Drops in the jewel finish and the gloss finish. So you can easily mix up all of these across your card if you wanted to. You could do all 5 of the different types of things. But I just wanted to use newer products for this card because it was one for the launch on Hochanda. And I love that Cascading Butterfly card so much. That's why it was day 1 of the Advent series. So you saw me then adding glue to the back of that really fine die cut, and then I tapped it off on the back of my hand. That's just to make sure there's no blobs of excess glue, because especially on vellum it's going to squish out the sides and be really noticeable. So now I'm using Postbox Red and Dusty Rose Nuvo Vintage Drops, and I just filled that small heart with the Dusty Rose, and then I squeezed out some Postbox Red, and I'm using a pokey tool to pick up a little bit of the product and swirl it on and dot it on just to create a little pattern within that small heart. The great thing about the vintage drops is they sort of dry more malleable than the normal crystal drops, so you shouldn't get any cracking for this technique. Whereas on day 1 you saw that there was a bit of cracking in the butterflies. And for that heart I just blobbed on multiple blobs of each of the 2 colours and then literally marbled them together with the pokey tool. So for the hearts I'm going to be using worn linen and what's the red called? Red leather Nuvo Expanding Mousse, but I also want a pink colour, so I'm going to mix together probably like 4/5 of the worn linen, 1/5 of the red leather, just to create a kind of pinky tone, which almost exactly matches that Dusty Rose Nuvo Vintage drop as well. And then I'm just like properly slathering that onto that heart so it's nice and thick. You'll see me applying the red leather one to these 2 hearts, and I don't apply it thick enough. You can see I've practically scraped off all of the texture compared to the pink one. But in a minute I will show you a way to add a second layer onto it so that you still get the same puffy effect that the expanding mousse gives. I have got a up close video on the Nuvo expanding mousse. I have edited it, but I can't remember whether I've actually posted it yet, but it will be up on this channel within the next month or so if it's not already up. So basically, the thicker you apply it, the more it's going to puff, and to puff it up you just need to apply heat, and either of the heat tools work. I'm using the slow one here, but the directional one works just as well. So whichever one you have is perfect to use. And if you apply it nice and thickly, you get that cool bubbly texture, especially if you kind of press your palette knife into it to get a cool, like a peaky texture. That definitely gives you a good puff as well. And you can see here, I applied it a lot thinner and it's not puffing so much. I mean, sometimes you might want that look, but because this was such a large heart, I actually wanted a lot of the texture in it so it looked more interesting, but you could leave it just like that. But in a second I will show you, right now, I'm going to add more to the one I haven't puffed yet because I know it's not going to puff up enough, and you can even add more to when you have puffed up and then heat it again to get the super puffy effect. And the expanding mousses are really easy to clean up, just like the embellishment mousses. You know, just a baby wipe or kitchen roll will clean them up nicely. I hope you can't hear that. Someone's playing their music really loud, turning around. They're at the end of the road. But you can see the really puffed up texture there because I added extra mousse on that one, and this is the one I already puffed before, but it's still going to work puffing up a second layer on it as well. That might be a cool technique to do. You could spread it thinly across a whole background, heat it, and then put a stencil on and apply it through the stencil and then heat it again, so you've got 2 dimensions of it. That would look really nice. So we've got our ones already done there. And now you can see I'm trimming the pieces down to be smaller, and then I'm going to stick them behind the apertures. So the other day when I showed you the Pebeo Fantasy paints and I was using the Sue Wilson Cascading Butterflies die, all of that hard work was done for you because of the die. But if you don't have a die like that, you can easily do it with any nesting shapes that you have. You just have to sort of think about it a little bit more and cut down your pieces so that they're not going to overlap too much behind and make it too bulky. But it's, you know, it's a really easy thing to get around. That pink colour looks so nice with the Dusty Rose Nuvo Vintage drops as well. The pink that we created, I mean. So just sticking the last heart on. You want to leave that to dry a little bit because it's a little bit lumpy in some places where you've sort of gone outside of the heart, so you want to make sure that actually sticks down nicely. And then I'm just using foam tape in all of the other areas where there isn't that extra card, so that it lays flatter onto our card, because otherwise you're going to get lumpy areas where all of those random bits are behind it. So it just gives it a neater finish. You don't have to be quite so over the top with the foam tape as I am. And I'm just adding a little bit of sellotape just to make sure all of those pieces are going to stay stuck. And because we've added the foam tape, you know, you don't want them to fall down inside the card. Then I'm just going to add the CRaFTi sentiment, kind of doing it across the centre of the card. I often put them more towards the top or towards the bottom, but for this design I felt like because that red heart was so big, I wanted to overlap the sentiment onto that just to fill up some of that space. And then I'm just going to add it to a white square card blank, leaving a larger border than I usually do. I usually only leave a few millimetres around the edge of my panel and the size of the card blank, but occasionally it's nicer to have that sort of white on white layer and leave a little bit of extra space. I'm just going to stick it in the centre, and then to make the border of the card look nice, I'm just using the Nuvo Aqua Shimmer Glitter Gloss pen just to add on some sparkle. You can't really see it in the video, or I don't think you can even see it in the photos that much either, but in real life you can see it. And now I'm just going to be using the same two colours of the vintage drops to add that kind of scattered cascading effect across the card. And I even drew on a heart onto the other bigger heart just to fill up a bit more of that space as well. So I'm dropping down drops of both of the colours, the Postbox Red and the Dusty Rose, and then I'm also squeezing out some excess of them, and I'm going to do the swirly dots like I did in day one of this series. I really love that technique. So easy to do. You literally just scoop up a little bit onto the end of your pokey tool, blob it on the centre of the Nuvo drop, and then just draw around in a swirl shape. And if you've not picked up quite enough product, you can easily just pick up some more and go back in again. And if you don't want to do them directly to your project, in day one of this series I did them onto a piece of backing from some double-sided sticky sheet, and that works just as well. And then I felt like it needed a little bit of extra, so I used some of the gloss white Nuvo crystal drops to fill in those spaces. And I think the difference between the matte of the vintage drops and the gloss of the white drops looks really good. And then you can see it up close of that lovely pink colour that we mixed. And that's pretty much the card. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Just showing some extra techniques of doing like a Nuvo embellished kind of card. Yeah, so thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye.